Hello everyone, welcome back to this video lecture series on English for skill enhancement. Today's topic would be reading, its importance and strategies for effective reading. So let's see what would be the overview of my lecture today. I have divided my lecture into basically three major segments. First segment I would be talking about what is reading, is the definition of reading, and then I would be talking about or discussing about why reading is important. And then in the last segment of the lecture, we would be discussing about how to read effectively. That means the strategies for effective reading. Right. So let's see the definition of reading. So reading is a process of looking at series of written symbols and extracting meaning from them. So as you can see here in this definition, you can find two main things in reading, right? One is obviously looking. It's a mechanical process. We look at a written symbol, the written symbols, and then at the same time we also extract meaning, after looking or while looking through those written symbols. Right? So you can see there are two aspects basically when it comes to the process of reading. So then it involves a mechanical and cognitive aspect. So mechanical aspect is nothing but the act of looking, and cognitive aspect is understanding whatever we are reading. The process of understanding is it cognitive exercise, right? So you can see the act of looking, rhythmic eye movement, these are all related to mechanical aspect of the process of reading. And then when it comes to cognitive aspect, it's basically decoding the meaning or comprehending the meaning. That is the cognitive aspect of reading, right? So let's move to the next slide and see what is there. Why reading is important. So this is the second segment of the lecture series. As I told, I would be discussing about the importance of reading. So there are many, important reasons. Though it is subjective, it might vary from person to person, but these are basically the major, importance or main points when it comes to importance of reading. The first and foremost thing is the acquisition of knowledge, right? Knowledge acquisition. So obviously, when we read something, our primary purpose is always to acquire some knowledge or to gather some information on some important topic. It can be related to a subject, it can be related to, something that is happening in and around us. So anything, it's about knowledge acquisition. So until unless we read, it's very difficult to gather information or to acquire knowledge, right? So that is one of the most important thing about reading. Then language abilities also. If we want to improve our language abilities, then also we need to read. Now, what is language abilities? Now, let's say if you're talking about English language and we want to improve the language abilities, that means our ability to speak English, then what we need to do? We need to first, go through the grammatical concept, right? Because until unless we are aware about grammatical concept, we won't be able to form sentences and, do all other required things. So that's why for that purpose also we need to read. So in order to develop our language abilities, also we need to read. There is no other option. Obviously, practice is one important aspect, but before you start practicing, we need to read to gain the primary knowledge about that particular language, right? So this is one importance of reading. Then imagination and creativity. For this also reading is very important. Now, let's say, if we want to become imaginative, if we want to become creative, then also we need to read. Otherwise, it's very difficult. Let's say if I want to be creative, I need to have certain understanding, certain primary ideas about a topic or about anything. It can be a thing like for innovation, or it can be, let's say if I'm planning to write a paper, I need to have certain ideas about, this area, the focus area where I can actually come up with a paper, good paper. So for all those things, I need primary reading. Otherwise, I won't be able to do that. That's why in order to be imaginative, in order to enhance our imagination and creative also, we need to read. Then reason and intuition. Now this is very important thing. This we use not only in our academic or professional spheres, but in our personal spheres also. When we reason something, when we try to analyze something with reason or intuition, that time also, like that intuition or reason, where do we get those, qualities, those skills, the skills of reasoning and intuition? Nothing but reading. When we read, we actually develop those qualities, because we see how characters are actually using their, let's say if I'm reading a novel, I might learn by observing a character how actually he or she is reasoning to tackle a particular situation, and how he or she is actually using his or her intuition to tackle a particular situation. That's why reading helps us to develop our reasoning skill and intuition also. Then critical thinking. Critical thinking is what? Critical thinking means when we look at something not only from the surface level, like we also try to go deep, we try to delve deep into that particular thing and try to analyze in more detail. Now that is called critical thinking. Now for that purpose also we need reading, because reading only will give us the base for critical thinking. Now if we don't read, it's very difficult for us to get engaged in critical thinking. So that is one another important thing, importance of reading. It helps us to think critically. Then stimulation of brain. Obviously now, like our body needs exercise, our brain also needs exercise, right? So reading is the most easily available medium where we actually can provide our brain some exercise. So it stimulate our brain. So for that purpose also reading is important. And then ultimately social skill. Now this is very broad thing, like it includes, you can say, all these things, social skills. So in order to develop social skills, we need to have knowledge, right? For that reading is required. We need to have critical thinking skill. For that also reading is required. Language abilities, communicate. Now social skill is also, being able to communicate with people is also one important aspect of social skill. So for that also reading is important. Now being imaginative and creative also will enhance our social skills. So these are basically, the social skills are actually, you can say, the amalgamation of all these points. So for developing social skills also, we need reading. So these are basically the importance of reading. Now let's come to the next slide. That is the third segment or the last segment of the lecture, that where I would be talking about effective reading strategies, right? What are the reading strategies? So before that, let's just look into the challenges that we face while reading. So lack of concentration, slow reading speed, difficulty in comprehension, and lack of motivation or interest. These are 4 broad challenges that we face. Now, if we are suffering with our reading, so obviously that must be because of any one of these, or maybe because of all of these reasons. Right? Now, let's see how to read effectively. What are the strategies that we need to follow in order to make our reading effective? Now, why am I using the word effective reading again and again? Because we need to understand, we might have seen many people who read, like, let's say 6 hours, 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours a day. But ultimately, when they go and write, let's say it is a very basic example, it might not be applicable always, but it happens. Sometimes what happens, they read for 12 hours, 10 hours, but then when they write exam and when the result come, we see that they got very less score, or their score was not up to that hard work that they were putting, like by reading 12 hours a day or 10 hours a day. Now, why do you think, why does it happen so? Because maybe though it was a fact that he or she was reading for 10 hours or 12 hours a day, but his or her reading was not effective. Though he was reading or she was reading, but she was not able to achieve the goal of his reading, right? Now we'll see how to tackle those kind of situations. So how to read effectively. So first and foremost, obviously, is motivation or purpose. So before we start reading something, we need to ask ourselves, why am I reading this? Let's say I am planning to read a short story. Now, before I start doing that, I need to ask myself, why am I reading this? Or why should I read this? Why am I going to read this? That's to set the motivation or purpose very clear at the beginning only. So if I am reading something with a purpose in mind, with motivation in my heart, obviously my reading would be much more effective, right? So that is the first important step for making our reading effective. Now, second one is activating background knowledge. So once we get to know about what we read, we can also activate our background knowledge. Now, if I am reading on a particular topic, I might already have certain amount of information about the topic, right? So what I need to do there, I need to activate that background information. Okay. Now, what it will do, if I activate my background knowledge, I would be curious to read, because I would be looking whether my already existing knowledge will get upgraded if I read this particular piece of writing. So that's why I will get further motivation, or I would be able to concentrate more on the process of reading, right? So that is also second important. Activating background knowledge is the second important step. Now, selecting suitable reading techniques. Once we are done with that, we need to also be careful about selecting technique. Now, there are certain number of techniques available for us to read. Now, we that depends on our purpose. So according to our purpose, we can actually adopt a particular kind of technique. Now, one very simple example is, let's say if we are looking for a answer for a MCQ type question or short question, a very small information if I'm looking from a text, but I won't read each and every word in detail, right? What I'll do, I'll quickly scan over the pages to find out that particular information and answer. Now, that means when my purpose is to look for a particular information, I am reading a scanning method or scanning techniques, right? I am not using an intensive or extensive reading technique. So that's why being aware about different reading techniques also is very important. Now, to look for a particular information, we need to have a particular kind of technique. When we try to understand the overall meaning of the text, we have a certain technique at our disposal. Then when we try to judge the quality of the argument presented in any documents, then obviously we need to employ certain different kind of technique. Now let's see the techniques now. What are the effective reading techniques? So first thing is scanning. This I already have discussed. If we are looking for one particular information, very small information, we don't need to read in detail. What we'll do, we'll quickly, that is actually scanning. So for a particular information, we'll quickly just scan the pages and try to find out the answer. Now see, this is the example, checking timetable. Now if I am looking for my slot on a particular day, let's say today only I had to do record this video. So I need to check my class timetable and find out during this time whether I had any class or not. So I was looking for a particular information on what was my class schedule for today. So that method is called, scanning. I just quickly glanced over the page and focused only on that particular day, like today, Tuesday, after lunch, and then found out that I am free during that time. So that is called scanning, right? Now, what is scanning? When we try to develop an overall understanding of the text, we don't look for each and every detail. No, we just try to develop an overall understanding. You can say the gist of something. So for that purpose, what we do, we skim. What is the meaning of skimming? Skimming means we jump. We don't read each and every word, each and every sentences. We just go through the headings, subheadings, few important points in between. Okay, or maybe the first line only of the first paragraph, like that, in order to understand the general content, the general idea, right? Main idea of something. So that is called skimming method technique. And what is intensive reading? Intensive is the most serious kind of reading. From the name itself, you can see intensive. What is the meaning of intense? Intense means serious. So intensive reading is most serious kind of reading. Now, when do we use it? Let's say we are trying to understand a concept thoroughly. It can be a theory or anything. Then we need to do an intensive reading. We cannot just quickly, skim. You cannot just quickly jump over the headings or subheadings. Otherwise, we won't understand. So what we have to do, we have to employ an intensive reading technique in that case. What is extensive reading? This is also kind of detailed reading, but not as seriously as we do while we do intensive reading. And extensive reading is like, maybe we read each and every word or each and every sentence, but we don't try to process the meaning of each and every sentence. Classic example is, when we read a novel. Now what happens normally? There will be many words that, we are not familiar with, or we will not be familiar with, right? So do we look for the meaning of that particular word each and every time whenever we encounter a new word? No, right? We just, skim, we just move ahead because we anyway get the overall meaning. So that kind of reading is called extensive reading, and this kind of reading technique is normally used for pleasure kind of reading, like when we are reading just for entertainment, not for serious purpose of understanding anything, right? So these were the basic techniques. Now there is another method that is called SQ3R method. This is also one important reading techniques or methods that can make our reading really effective. Now what is this? SQ3R stands for survey. So what is survey? Survey is nothing but you can find a similarity with skimming. So what we do while we survey something, what we do actually, we quickly go through our documents, just read the headings, subheadings, or important points, first paragraphs, or first line of the first paragraphs, just to get an overall idea, overview of the content. So that is called survey. So once we are done with survey, what we do, we frame certain questions. What are the questions? Like we can turn the subheadings into questions. Now why? Now this is very important, framing questions. Why? Because it set our goal. If we know that we are looking for certain information, or by default our reading become much more effective because we concentrate more, right, to find those answers. So that's why it's very important. If we don't have any questions, sometimes our reading might be aimless. But if we already have certain questions in our mind, our reading would be very focused, because through the process of reading, we'll try to find answer to those questions. That's why framing question is very important. The next step is read. So what do we go read in detail, like sentences, each and every sentences we read in detail. So that is called actively engaging with the text. And then recite. Recite means what? Summarize what you read. So once we are done reading in detail each and every line, we can recite what we have understood, the summary of the content that we have already read. And then last step, what we do? Revisit the key points. We review our understanding. We check our answers, like the answers that we found for these questions. So that is nothing but review. So while reading something, we can follow these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 steps. That can also make our reading really effective. Now let's see the next point, other strategies. Now there are certain other active reading strategies that will make our reading effective. What are those? They are very simple. You are already familiar with annotating or taking notes. So it's very important to take notes, like to develop the habit of taking note while we read something. Highlighting key points is very important because it helps us to retain a particular concept for longer time in our brain. Making summary also is very important. And then asking questions while reading. So this is already been discussed. Like before we start reading something or during the process of reading, we need to ask ourselves questions continuously and search for answers. That can make our reading really effective. Now let's come to the next slide. Speed reading techniques. So how to read in a fast manner to avoid subvocalization or silent reading of the words we can do. Then we can use pointer or guide that can actually help to speed up our reading process. Then expand peripheral vision. Now this is very important. What is peripheral vision? Now let's say, for example, if your eyes are not trained, it will process only one word at a time, he. But if my eyes is little more trained, then what will happen is my eyes will process the meaning of these two words together, right? Now if it is well trained, then he is a good boy. Let's say he is a good boy. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 words together my eyes will process. So what is happening here? Because of the continuous practice or training, the peripheral vision of my eye will expand. So I will be able to catch more number of words, of the meaning of more number of words effectively. Right? Now, improve reading comprehension. Reading in a distraction-free environment. This is a very common point. Content into sections. Like don't read the entire content as a whole. Rather, break it into small section and focus one section at a time. That can also make our reading effective. Reread the difficult parts. So one time reading might not be enough. Maybe for certain part of a text it might be enough, but there might be a difficult portion within a text or document. So those part you need to reread. Then relate new information to prior knowledge. We already spoke about activating background knowledge. So once you read something new, once you acquire new information, just have a comparison between your existing knowledge or previous knowledge with your new knowledge. And then discuss what you have read. This is very important. If you can do that, if you can discuss what we have read with others, obviously that will help us to retain the information in for much more longer time. Right? Now, developing reading habit. Reading is very important, and how do we actually develop a reading habit? You can set a daily goal for reading, choose engaging materials, because that will help you to actually keep up that habit. Then maintain a reading journal, take a note every day, how much you have read, what you have read and all. That is reading journal, maintaining a reading journal. And then you can join book clubs or discussion groups. So that can also actually help you to improve your reading habit or to enhance your reading habit. So in this discuss, we actually got to know about the definition of reading, the mechanical and the cognitive aspect of reading. Then what are the effective reading techniques or strategies, and then developing a consistent reading habit. Like how do we develop consistent reading habit that actually can lead us to lifelong learning? So these are the 3 main takeaway points from today's lecture. Thank you all. See you in the next lecture.